An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6, Chapter 62, Napoleon of Westeros. Huh?
Keep your feet steady, Rhaegar. If you have to retreat, don't let your opponent force you down.
Crossing his arms with a smile, Jon watched as his son took his uncle's advice. The boy was small and impossibly young, but had the Targaryen fire and the unassuming strength of his great-uncle. Ollie, while growing like a weed, provided an excellent sparring teacher. All the 6-year-old was learning were the basics, and he was a prodigy. Ollie pressed forward. Rhaegar stepped back with a graceful move. No scrambling.
That's it! A little more invested than Sir Roderick, Rob. But otherwise, you remembered his lessons well.
The two brothers were leaning back on chairs in the great hall of Westeros. The twins were having their lessons out of the cold, Arya waiting her turn patiently to the side, while her brother sparred with Ollie. Practiced sword in hand, she practiced the simple steps that her namesake had taught her. If Arya the Elder's presence was missed, the young princess didn't show it.
Rob chuckled, grinning at his brother. It is my contribution to the future of the Empire by training the dragon wolves. Rhaegar will be ruling essentially the whole world with help from his sister. If I had a hand in it, then my work is done.
His mood grew slightly more somber.
Especially since Arya isn't here.
Jon frowned as well.
We'll get her back.
His fist clenched. They would get her back. All around, servants and labourers scrambled about the great hall, decorating it for a feast. The first in Winterfell since Jon and Dany had wed. Another wedding would grace the castle on the next day, this time for their lord rather than their king. The Warden of the North would finally gain his wardeness. House Stark would finally get its lady. Currently, the ladings were all in the Lady of Winterfell's solar, preparing Marjorie for her special day. And underneath his facade, Jon could tell that Rob was terrified. It was understandable. There was always pre-wedding nerves. Jon had them, and he loved Daenerys desperately. But with Rob, Jon knew it was more than that. He hadn't been around, only witnessing the aftermath, but had heard stories about his sister-in-law. The Queen Talisa Stark was disliked as a foreigner by many, but considered a kind, smart queen by those unbiased that knew her. Her death had left Rob a shell of a man, for only the fight against the dead had kept him from fully accepting the embrace of death. Marjorie brought him out of it, and gave him a second chance, not only at marriage, but a love match. And she was pregnant, the same as Talisa had been before Lothar Frey had stabbed her in the womb.
It won't happen to Marjorie. You know that, right?
Rob's face darkened considerably.
You don't know that. Walder Frey is dead, killed by Arya.
It still both impressed and disturbed Jon at how his sister had wiped out the residence of the twins. Winter definitely came for House Frey.
So are the Boltons.
That was largely his victory. His, Dany's, and Sansa's.
Talisa died because of me.
He was fighting the long-suppressed grief and guilt.
What if I fuck up and cause Marjorie and my child to suffer the same fate?
Before Jon could respond, he heard his daughter calling to him. Father, watch me! Watch me! She bounced with excitement, dying to show her beloved father how much she was improving in the basic water dancing.
Light on your feet, Arya,
he said, laughing at her exuberance. Jon couldn't fathom the level of joy his children imparted onto him. They washed away the negative brooding exterior, or any negative emotion, like a veritable tsunami. No matter the stress or rage boiling within him at the time. The pulsing headache that resided beneath his skull took a pause around Arya and Rhaegar. The only other time being was when he was with Dany. Looking at the quivering in Rob's lips, sheen in his eyes, Jon knew his brother would feel the same about his child.
It's why we do this, you know. Do what? Go all in, despite the fear, despite the worries. We're not like those that abandon their families. That isn't the Stark way.
Reaching out, Jon clasped his brother on the back.
We gotta look to the future. Look to the wonders of tomorrow. that we'll build a better world on top of the one we plan on building. Especially now, brother.
Watching Arya move gracefully, almost a carbon copy of that moment of their namesake, despite her silver locks and youth, Robb smiled.
Thank you, brother,
he told Jon, feeling lighter than he had been for the past few days. Ah, Sir Jaime. The hairs on the back of the former Kingsguard's neck stood at attention at the syrupy voice of the Lord Protector of the Vale, almost in complete rebellion. I did not know that Lord Tywin had discharged you from his service. Littlefinger's voice was cut off by Jaime slamming him into the brick wall, hand wrapped around his throat.
Give me one reason why I shouldn't squeeze the life out of you, child killer! Please, I'm all...
Gasping, spluttering, Littlefinger fought unconsciousness.
I'm all protecting Tommen.
At the name of his youngest, Jaime let Littlefinger go, who fell to his knees, gasping for breath.
It wasn't my idea. His Highest has been obsessed with the occult since the Red Witch fled.
Jaime felt like he could be lying, but was deathly curious.
And Tommen? Qyburn and the High Sparrow think they can finish the job of dispatching the Dragon Queen with his blood. But I intervened. He's the Lord of Storm's End, and I told Joffrey that the Stormlands wouldn't desert him if Tommen was harmed. He didn't deserve this fate. Neither of them do.
Fists clenched. Jaime was on the hair's edge of either crying or screaming in rage.
Where is Cersei?
When he left Bronn to storm into the Red Keep, her room had been empty, and his search had found Littlefinger. She's in Marcella's room. She hasn't left since. Baelish couldn't finish his sentence before Jaime rushed off. He found his sister that night. Jaime saw Cersei collapsed face down on Marcella's bed, eyes brimming with tears and hair shorn off in grief. She had thrown herself into his arms, Jaime giving her whatever comfort he could. It had been hard several few weeks in the capital since then. At least, for some. For others, things were going quite swimmingly, including the man sitting across from Jaime, in the high-end tavern within the wealthy neighbourhood of the city close to the Red Keep.
Food is much blander here, Lannister,
Daario Naharis remarked, biting into the hot meat pie.
Neat spices. An establishment such as this should be able to afford some. Forgive the humble tavern keeper. Spice imports are hard to come by with the loss of Slaver's Bay to your former queen and her husband.
Jaime couldn't help the snide remark. Daario Naharis had arisen in Joffrey's, his son's, esteem after capturing Arya Stark. It seemed like the small council delighted in assigning Jaime to him for counterintelligence operations against suspected traitors or Brotherhood members within the city. Daario excelled, while it made Jaime restless.
Oh well, it is too bad.
He put his spoon down.
See, traitors are the same in every continent. These ones here are no different from the ones in Meereen with the Sons of the Harpy. Idiots those were. At least the Brotherhood has some kind of religious destiny, not keeping down the 7 out of 10 people in their city. Quite, but they are at war with the king.
The whole war is an exercise in futility, Lannister. Daario's eyes twinkled, downing half of his mead.
She wasn't raised here. She has no concept of what Westeros wants or needs. The Stark bastard wishes to conquer all, and is using her to do it.
Jaime narrowed his eyes. The sellsword was playing an interesting game, going just far enough to test him, but restraining himself not to appear disloyal. And it wasn't like Jaime had enough clout anymore in the eyes of the court to disparage Joffrey's enforcer.
And what are you trying to say?
He waved over the barmaid for another portion.
Hunting makes one famished.
Daario laughed as a plate of stew was placed in front of him. What I'm saying is that the Dragon Queen would be a perfect client queen for his highest. Especially... He lowered his voice, understanding his mortality in the capital if he ran off too much, especially with the defeat of the Masters. Useless morons that they were. Her ruling Slaver's Bay for Joffrey would allow it to be integrated into his control. Nodding absent-mindedly, Jamie figured it made some sense. Only if one allowed the assumption that Daenerys Targaryen would ever allow this to transpire.
I presume she would be ruling with you by her side in some manner?
Smoking, Daario just sipped his ale. I would think I have more sense than the Stark bastard. From what he told the Dowager Queen, he thinks there's an army of corpses ready to attack us. That thought was insane to Jamie. But the rest of what Daario said also seemed mad.
I doubt she'd choose you over him, Naharis. From what we've heard, she is committed to him.
The pair of conquerors, one northern, one southern, fighting from Dragonback to conquer Westeros, like Aegon and his sister wives. Having witnessed them in person at Riverrun, Jamie knew one underestimated them at their own peril. Resuming to cut through his pie, Daario shrugged.
There are ways, Lannister.
There are ways. Line break. Winding back the crossbow, the Chimera reached for his fourth golden bolt, personally crafted by the goldsmith of King's Landing for their ruler. My aim is getting better, don't you think, fool? Joffrey giggled, putting the bolt in place. Once a noble knight, if not a proud or respected one, due to a maze of personal failings and the declining of a family fortune, Dontas Hollard sat from his stool in the corner of the king's chambers, just grateful to be alive.
Quite so, your highest,
he replied. The personal fool of the king was not a hard person to replace, and at any time Joffrey could end the tenure granted to him due to Sansa Stark's pleadings a long time past. A debt owed, not yet repaid. No need to be modest, fool. Joffrey was in a good mood, or else something harder would have joined several rotted fruits thrown in the direction of the last scion of House Hollard. My aim has gotten better. Soon I shall put a bolt into the heart of the Stark bastard. He raised the crossbow to his shoulder. After all, Grandfather has orders to capture him alive. At the release of the bolt, Dontas didn't even cringe as the projectile slammed into the woman's abdomen. Not the worst evil he had seen in his time as the king's plaything. She screamed into her gag, tied to a hook on the wall from Joffrey's bed. A former employee of Lord Peter Baelish, one that was causing him trouble. A hefty sum from the crown allowed Baelish to cater to the king's particular taste. Giggling once more, Joffrey skipped over to the whore, pulling the bolts slowly and agonizingly out of her. He felt so aroused, delighting in her pain. After that, perhaps Sansa will be in this bitch's place. I heard Ramsay Bolton liked to sample her. Means I'll have to get creative to get her to scream. Turning, the room turned to ice as he was face to face with the pale corpse of Robert Baratheon. No! Joffrey stammered, dropping the crossbow. You can't come back! Much time had passed since the last time he had been visited by the spectre of his father. Blood seeped from the demon's mouth and gut.
The winged beast bears down to you. Justice delivered. Justice due.
I am the winged beast, he cried. The Chimera sent by the Seven to deliver greatness. Joffrey was soon mortified as his father morphed before him into Ned Stark himself, risen from the dead. Skin pale, neck bisected in a large cut, Ned's eyes glowed a malevolent blue.
Plan failed, it has. Abomination created. All gods have been angered. One man rewarded.
No! The Stark bastard will die! I sacrificed king's blood to do so!
Demon brought to this earth, who the risen must see.
Ned Stark's neck fountained blood, head slipping off and rolling to just before Joffrey's feet. The mouth still moved.
That foretold shall pass. The gods' justice will be.
Dontas Hollard observed his king, his tormentor, collapse onto the bed, weeping and screaming in pure agony. Line break. The few candles lit the Winterfell war room in a low orange light, casting a warm yet sinister appearance. For a large council, many would have to squint through the still prevalent darkness. But for the single figure, hunched over the centre of the Westerosi continent like a dark god observing his domain. The little light from the room's candelabras and the single lantern placed beside him on the table was sufficient for his purposes. The sounds drifted through the walls around the wedding feast at full swing, ensuring he wouldn't be disturbed. The wedding had found him officiating and given the speech in the groom's honour, but he had slipped away as soon as he could. Drunk revellers, noble lords, and his family could spare him celebrating Robb and Marjorie tying the knot before the gods would. Once again, Jon found himself staring at the map table. All pieces were arranged just as they had been since the aftermath of the losses months earlier and his victories in Essos. Static, eating up supplies plentiful for Tywin, but slowly depleting for him. Ravens carrying dispatches brought news both good and bad. Good being from Podrick, ready to depart Volantis with significant reinforces blessed by the Council of New Valyria. Bad that Yara had failed to force her way through the naval defences guarding the narrow sea, protecting King's Landing from the ocean side. Such allowed the Golden Company to arrive in the capital. News courtesy of Bran and his exceptional green scene. Every line of attack he imagined just found 3 different ways Tywin could shift his forces in order to funnel them onto ground chosen by the man who had made Dawn howl. No, he needed to force Tywin onto ground of his choosing, to react to his movements. Trouble was, it was looking impossible, and with the dead approaching, he couldn't risk the dragons against Lannister rockets and scorpions. God help me. Jon? If Jon was surprised to hear her being the voice that disturbed his solitude, he didn't show it. Lady Stark, he replied, coolly but politely, a tone he had perfected over his childhood. I thought you had remained at the feast. Catelyn bit her lip, the Emperor keeping his back turned to her. She took in what she saw. Flowing black hair down to the base of his neck, shoulders tense, hands splayed across the table, head bent down in deep thought. Jon may have been Rhaegar's son, but in this he was all Ned. With a sigh, she stepped alongside him. Everyone was continuing to have a good time, so I decided to put the twins to bed. Jon felt a pang in his heart for his children. He had just seen them hours before, but missed them all the same. Same as with Dany. Are they all right? He asked tenderly. Aye, they are. Arya wanted me to make sure you were fine. Truthfully, Catelyn would do anything for those precious children. To her, she felt like the same way about them as she did with Robb's unborn babe. They were a chance for her to genuinely make right on the promise she made to the gods, as Jon laid ill so long ago. Tell them I'm fine. He made no move to even look at her, much as he desired to forgive and forget. In this moment of great stress, he felt the long, dormant anger bubbling up. Catelyn placed a motherly arm on his shoulder. Are you sure? He immediately shook her off, causing her to flinch. Why do you care? In all honesty, Catelyn had expected this. Since Ned informed her of the truth, of the greatest secret in all of Westeros, she had waited for when Jon to confront her. Daenerys had. Sansa had. Robb had. Hell, even Arya had before she was captured. There was not one day where she did not flay herself for it, for failing her vow to the gods. And yet Jon had put it aside. Until now. I deserve that, Jon. Yes, you do. He could feel the dragon finally awakening, pressing his eyes to the fiery anger enough to turn it into a scalding simmer. A single word. Why? She owed him an explanation, but whatever formed at the tip of her tongue seemed woefully inadequate to her. I have nothing to say that would justify it, Jon. Part of me thinks it was your threats to Robb's claim. I never wanted Winterfell! He turned his head to yell at her. He immediately shifted back to the table. All I wanted was to be a Stark. To be loved and accepted by my family. Your hate robbed any bond I could have had with Sansa, and it took being married to Ramsay Bolton for her to change that. It still pained him. Father
accepted me. Rob accepted me. Arya and Bran and Rickon accepted me. But it wasn't the same. I was always something of an outcast, even to them. All because I was born. The last sentence had dropped into a whisper. It were times like this where Catelyn truly felt the pain of Ned's death. But it was justice from the gods for her to face this alone. I hate myself for it. You were just a child, and I let my own insecurity and bitterness fall on someone who was blameless in all of it. Jon's voice dropped to a low whisper. You never made me forget who I am. Always made sure I knew that I was not a Stark. Knew that all of Winterfell wished I had died long ago. The former Lady of Winterfell, a title now passed to Marjorie, was silent for a moment. Decades ago, when you were just a babe, you contracted the pox from one of the servants. Weak with fever, Maester Lewin informed us you were close to death. But for a moment, I hoped it would happen. Jon was silent, so Catelyn continued, feeling herself the monster she was. Feeling Sansa move inside me. I realised immediately how evil such thoughts were. But you continued to deteriorate. The curse of a woman's spite solely. I lost the man I was supposed to marry. Lost him to the Mad King's fire. As she was talking, Jon felt tears in his eyes. His grandfather, murdering his uncle and other grandfather, solely due to the love his true parents shared for each other. His birth had created so much pain on the world, a weight falling on his shoulders. With Brandon dead, with marrying his stranger of a brother, I hoped that Ned would love me, and I thought we had when he rode off with the usurper. But he came home with you in his arms, supposedly the babe of the woman he chose. Gods. The pain of past feelings and her current shame shook her. I hated him, but I loved him too. It was easier for me to resent you for all of it, and it hit me at that point. I prayed to the gods to save you, and in return I would take care of you as a mother would. They delivered, but I didn't. She felt hot tears running down her cheeks. I never thought much about the gods and fate, not as much as Ned did, but all that our family has been through, all of the pain and suffering and death, all of it found itself born in the fact that I couldn't love a motherless boy. The room was silent for what seemed like an eternity. When Bran was hurt, Jon finally said, Father had told you the truth, since you let me see him without raising a fuss? Yes, he had. I couldn't muster any anger towards you after that, nor did I want to. Jon sighed. I've met so many, dealt with so many, dispensed justice to so many who erred, but did not ever accept the error of their ways. His mind drifted to Viserys, to Janos Slynt, to Thorne and the conspirators, all men bullheaded in their wrongthink. You aren't one of them. You hurt me greatly, Lady Stark, but even the good in this world can make mistakes. I won't forget, but I can forgive. Someone like Joffrey could never be forgiven for their evil, but someone like Catelyn could be forgiven for their mistakes. Her contrition was genuine. You are a better man than all of us, just like Ned. Blinking through the droplets, Catelyn chuckled dryly. Ironic. Everyone assumed that the Honourable Ned Stark would never lie. She sighed, remembering how good her husband was, even when it would hurt him. He remained true to himself, when, really, he was too honourable not to lie for you.
In his own way, Ned beat the experts at the Game of Thrones. John couldn't help but smirk at the thought.
He really did.
Even Varys, the master of knowledge, hadn't even found out. He used his honour and reputation to outflank them all.
Outflank them all?
Eyes widening, John felt his mind whir in an epiphany. Almost manically flicking his gaze across the map table, he could see the vast troop movements. Demonstrations to tie down the Lannisters, skirmishes and battle as Tywin frantically tried to rescue himself from the threat. All culminating in one final battle. All if he could take a page out of his father's playbook.
Lady Stark, he began, do people compare me to my father? My father, Ned Stark.
He felt the need to add. Blinking, Catelyn furrowed her brows in confusion. The comparison has been one I've heard. That you are as honourable as he is. She hesitantly placed her hand back on his shoulder. He was your father, John. Rhaegar might have also been as such. But Ned raised you. He loved you. It heartened John. But this wasn't why he asked.
No, something else.
Decisive, his shoulders thrown back and a spring in his step for the first time in weeks, John threw the door open.
Sir Barristan, wait outside. I may call in on you promptly.
Furrowing his brows, Barristan nevertheless bowed.
I shall obey, your majesty.
Shutting the door, John found himself face to face with Catelyn. The former Lady Stark and current member of the small council was worried about the complete change in demeanour of the Emperor. He was planning something. And the fact he had only asked for her and Barristan, not Daenerys, Davos, Tyrion or Sansa, perplexed her further. What's going on, John? John regarded the woman that had tormented him his entire childhood. The woman that had also cared for his children and given them unconditional love. What was about to pass, if it was to work, needed nearly everyone in his inner circle to be unaware of his plans. Even Daenerys. At least until the end. He needed someone to plan it with him, however, and no one would suspect him to confide in Catelyn Stark. After her confession to him, perhaps he could trust her. Dany did.
No one can know of what I am about to tell you. Understood?
She nodded, listening patiently as he recounted the thoughts and inspirations that had popped into his head. By the end of it, her jaw had dropped in a stunned silence. What was said was so intricate, so devious, yet unassuming. You truly are your father's son. Somehow John's plan would keep his honour and deceive them all.
Daenerys cannot know, nor can any of the hands.
I agree. Catelyn did not wish to betray the Empress, or her own daughter, but it was necessary. Joffrey would be easily fooled, but not Tywin or the others. Their reactions must be genuine to fool those experienced with the game. Her brow rose. But why Sir Barristan? Why not Robb or Grey Worm? John smiled.
Because this plan is his brainchild.
Or derived from it, at least.
Sir Barristan, come in!
The door to the map room opened and Barristan entered.
Welcome back. As your majesty commands, I obey, he replied,
striding up to John and Lady Stark. A confusing pair, to say the least.
Although it puzzles me as to what is happening, if I may be blunt.
It was known that the Emperor visited this room often, but he was always alone and never sought counsel. Motioning to the map table, John waited until both Catelyn and Sir Barristan had their eyes trained on where his were, the centre of the Westerosi continent.
Sir Barristan, you have been quite vocal in your proposition for victory since even before we left Essos. Do you mind repeating said plan?
Confused, Barristan nevertheless complied.
Sire, for the moment, all geographic objectives can wait. We must force out Tywin's army and defeat it in detail. Get them to react to us, and destroy his army as he falls in our traps. King Joffrey is powerless without Tywin's army, and it grows larger by the day as the Golden Company and other sellsword armies arrive in King's Landing. It is what we did with Maelys Blackfire, and went after him and his army, rather than the towns of the Stepstones.
John did not know about the Golden Company. and the added complication disconcerted him, but only for a moment. It mattered not to his plans.
And how can we accomplish this, given Tywin has essentially fortified the entirety of the Crown lands?
He'll fall back to King's Landing and get us nowhere.
We should turn his flank and send everything down the Gold Road, only for Kevin Lannister to block us with his reverse force here.
The Emperor pointed to the cluster of lion banners.
No, what we need is something bolder. Did you have something in mind, Your Majesty?
Reaching over, with wide swaths of his hand, Jon pushed all the Imperial army markers, every single one, down the path he wished to execute. As Catelyn had been before responding to the entirety of Jon's plan, Barristan found himself in wordless amazement regarding the Emperor's military mind. Truly, Aegon the Conqueror reborn, only with the blood of the North as well. Analysing the movements and tactics once more in his head, Barristan found them brilliant.
This can work, sire. This will work.
All three then looked back at the table, and to the various unit markers clustered around one castle. Highgarden. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that, because this is getting really interesting. I like how Jon is just like, wait, this, and this, boom, got it. It's great. And oh boy, this is going to be interesting. Daario, what are you planning again? Because that dude is as slippery as an eel. And of course, Jaime's anger. A grieving father, though he's not allowed to show it. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified if I never upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!